You hate how your body looks. And honestly, you probably think it's impossible to change that. Between working 8 to 14 hours a day, travel, stress, takeout, it feels like health is the price you pay for success. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. Hi, I'm Akib. I am the founder of Team Akib, and I've coached hundreds of people, including consultants, tech founders, as well as tech professionals. And I've helped them get lean, strong, and build confidence all along this process, all while working 80 to 100 hours a week. And the system I'm about to show you, it takes less than 50 minutes to integrate into your day to day. I call it the 3-lever body optimization system, and I want to walk you through it right now. I'll share my screen, draw it out, and show you how you engineer things without flipping things around about your lifestyle. Now listen, this is probably you right here. The thing is, you're probably running a business, maybe working corporate, some high position where it's extremely stressful and you're working long hours. I'm talking 60, maybe even 100 hours a week. It might seem unreasonable. I totally get it. The thing is, these start to stem with issues, excuses. You start telling yourself, I don't have time. I'm too busy. I can't manage all of these things. Oh, I travel a lot. I have to meet with my founders. I have to meet with my venture capitalists, whatever it is. This leads to the misconceptions. Now, let me explain. There comes certain misconceptions that say, hey, you have to go to the gym 6 times a week. Maybe you have to go on a strict meal plan. Maybe you need to follow a specific routine that every influencer, for God's sake, just for some reason posts, even though that does not actually help them get where they want, right? When have you ever done a specific routine which completely aided in the development of your empire? Probably not a routine. It's the fact that you actually put in the work and did what works. Now, let me explain. So here comes the planning. This is the 3-step lever program. So lever system. So you have the input control, energy management, as well as recovery. So what do I mean by input control? The first thing is that it leads to diet and supplements. Basically what you're putting into your body. This is what you can effectively control to be able to lose weight. Now your goal might be different. That might be gaining muscle. This also applies. Now the first 3 components of diets and supplements as part of input control is blood work, meal planning, as well as your gut health, brain health, as well as nootropics. Now let me get into it. So when we have your blood work, the reason I mention this is because a lot of people oftentimes tackle a problem that they can't even solve because they don't know what it is. So when you get your blood work, you end up having this. You have a bunch of different panels right here, right? You have a bunch of different panels all the way ranging from testosterone, your lipid panel, whatever it is, right? Maybe you don't understand these things, or maybe you don't have the prior knowledge to be able to understand these things. The thing is, it all leads down to the same issue. It could lead down to energy management problems. So what I mean is, I've noticed that a lot of people that have been working very long hours with poor sleep, poor digestion, poor appetite, possibly poor diet, whatever it is, right? They've all come down to the same problem, which is that they're starting to have a lot of deficiencies. They're having health problems ranging from low testosterone all the way to high cholesterol, whatever it is. Then comes the second step, which is meal planning right here. Now, what I mean by meal planning is effectively, as I've mentioned before, there was a misconception that you have to have a specific strict meal plan to be able to effectively lose weight or potentially build muscle. That's not true at all. Listen, it's all about what you put in versus what you output. What does that mean? It means how much are you effectively taking in into your body? How much food are you eating versus how much you're actually burning? And I'll give you a simple example. So we have something called a TDEE tracker, which effectively calculates your total daily energy expenditure. That's about how many calories you might burn. So you have your basal metabolic rate, which is the amount of calories you burn effectively just by sitting around. But then you also have the total daily energy expenditure, which is how much you burn on top of that, meaning you have these sedentary movements where you're just twitching, clicking, whatever it is that you're involuntarily doing. Therefore, just by existing, you're burning these calories. Now you have this extra facet, which is effectively you exercising, maybe walking a bit more, maybe doing other unconventional things that might lead to burning more calories. That is your total daily energy expenditure. Now, when you're meal planning, the idea is you take your total daily energy expenditure and then you simply reduce the calories by a couple hundred calories. That's it. You're going to slowly progress down from that. Meaning, let's just say your calorie intake is about 3,000. Sorry, 3,000, right? Now, that's how much you're burning day to day. But in order to lose weight, you might want to point towards something like 2,600 calories. That's only a 400 calorie deficit. But again, progress is progress at the end of the day. This is simply a starting point. The idea is for you to figure out how to go from this to this. So all you're gonna do is for the first week, you're simply gonna go over to something like a TDEE calculator, which will effectively be prompting you to enter your age, your weight, your gender, as well as how often you work out or even how often you exercise. It could be construction, whatever it is, right? You're calculating that. So all you're gonna do is simply try your best to follow these caloric needs for just 1 week. See if you drop weight. Go on the scale every single day and try to track your fasted weight, meaning what's your current weight right now in the morning, and then what are you weighing in the next day? Make sure you are weighing yourself in with no clothes, just boxers, whatever it is, and just making sure that you are on an empty stomach. Again, we want the least amount of factors that affect weight, meaning you don't want something getting in the way that makes your weight fluctuate randomly because you have extra clothes, whatever it is. Now, once you've tracked that, let's just say in the case that you are at 3,000 and that is your true maintenance, which is how much you need to stay at the same weight, then you're simply going to burn, or you're simply going to reduce it down to 2,600. And you're going to track it for a week. See how much weight you lose. You might expect to lose about a pound. Maybe in the first week, what happens is you end up dropping 7 pounds, maybe 6 pounds, 5 pounds, whatever it is. A lot of that comes from water storages or glycogen storages, which is effectively carb molecules binding to water molecules. What that means is in between your muscles, you have something called glycogen, which is carb molecules binded with water molecules stored to make your muscles look a lot fuller. So you'll start depleting that. That's your first line of energy source, which your body depletes first to get that energy because you are on less calories. Then your body starts tapping into the fat storages, which is where you'll start seeing the actual fat loss. That's why we recommend starting with something relatively low just to gauge where you're at and then slowly progress from there. So now that you're at 2,600, you've burned about a pound of fat, right, over the course of a week. Remember, weight is never linear across days. It's linear across weeks. So you'll simply follow this for about 2 weeks, let's just say, for example. And then the following week, let's just say you want to speed up the progress or you're stagnating. Maybe you want to drop it down to 2,400. So a simple mild decrease of about 200 calories. There you go. You're now starting to see more progress. But what happens when you start to stagnate? Simply either decrease more or you can add in some cardio. Again, it depends on how much time you have. But the idea is the misconception stems that you have to effectively follow the same plan every single day and that you have to be on a strict diet, chicken and rice, whatever you hear. That's wrong. If you are traveling a lot, it means nothing to be able to do that because you can't even have access to that. So maybe you might want to start looking into options that are healthier, such as Chipotle, Kava, whatever it is. There's always a range of healthy alternatives, which allow you to effectively not only track the calories relatively accurately, but also make sure that you are getting in the right amount of protein. Again, when you follow this amount of calories, make sure that throughout this entire process, your protein intake is high. It's extremely high, meaning when I say extremely high, to the average person. So I recommend 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So when you do this, you're making sure that in the process of losing fat, you're also building some muscle, especially if you're new to the gym or if you want to retain a lot of that muscle. What happens is when you start very early and then you don't have a lot of protein intake, you end up with a skinny fat body just as where you started, just not as where you want it to be. So just make sure you have this in mind. The next step is just to make sure you have your fat intake, but that's another thing. Now let's get into the second step. The third step. The third step is gut health, brain health, and nootropics. I noticed that a lot of my own clients that are very busy often neglect, or at least used to neglect, a lot of these factors, but they don't understand that all these things tie in together. By that I mean, you have something called the gut-brain axis, which directly impacts, meaning between your gut and brain, they directly impact each other. So if you have poor gut health, that's going to leak into your brain, meaning it's sending signals so that you're effectively performing worse because you don't have the right digestion in play. And the same goes vice versa. And then you have something called nootropics, which is something I'll get into in a bit. But keep in mind that if you're going to eat like absolute crap, remember, you're going to feel it. You always hear the term, you feel what you eat, or rather, you are what you eat. It's more so that you actually feel like exactly what you're eating like. Because again, like I said, there's something called the gut-brain axis, which impact each other. Now, the reason I mentioned nootropics is that it's a large range of brain-stimulating supplements which effectively allow you to make sure that you are performing above what you normally perform at. So you have something such as alpha GPC. All right, so you have something called alpha GPC down here, right? Sorry, GPC, or even Dynamite. And the list goes on, right? So the idea here is that there's a lot of different supplements in play that can help you improve your actual brain function furthermore. And this is something that I personally like to prescribe to my own clients, especially when they're super busy. But now that we know that all these things play hand in hand, and we know that there's a lot more flexibility than this, I actually want to go back into the idea of blood work panels. What I mean is, I've actually had a client where they've been cutting for about 3 months, but they've seen like little to no progress. And I don't mean in the sense that they haven't lost fat. It's just the fact that their testosterone was about 140, 147, 46 DL, which is pretty low. The reference range is about 400 to 1,000 NG DL. Now, the reason I point this out is because there's a lot of different panels that you could look at, but let's just use testosterone as an example. He's working long hours. He's an architect. He owns his own architect company, something along those lines. But he has super low test, and he's been cutting for about 3 months, and he's seen no progress other than just pure fat loss, and he hasn't put on much muscle or even lost a little bit of muscle. So I quickly looked at his panels. I'm like, what? What's going on? This doesn't make any sense. I come to realize it's literally right there in front of me. All these things could have been ignored, and this could have been looked at initial glance. And the reason I mention this is because, again, you can still lose weight. Like I said, he's lost weight, he's lost fat, but he's also lost a little bit of muscle in the process. He hasn't gained any strength in the gym. So I quickly looked at it. I'm like, okay, if he has this, maybe let's tackle some problems. Maybe let's create some solutions. So the first thing I told him was, hey, take all these supplements like megadose vitamin D3, take iron, etc. Right? I told him to take all these different supplements, but the issue is it wasn't really getting him there. What ended up happening is that he ended up with about 300 nanograms per deciliter test. Now, there's a big issue here because when the range is relatively high and 400 is relatively considered low, especially even at your own age, I'm assuming that maybe you might be in your 30s, early 20s, whatever it is. Considering how testosterone works, this is a relatively low range. You do not want to be in that range. So beyond that, I started telling him, hey, take something like enclomiphene. Maybe take HCG, maybe take all these other specific peptides that aren't necessarily testosterone to ensure that you are at peak function as a human. Because remember, one of the main components of testosterone is not only sex drive, but it's also ensuring that you are, one, confident, two, making sure you are effectively performing cognitively. You are thinking clearer. You are making decisions better. When you have low testosterone, you have poor decision-making skills. Maybe you're a high-driven individual and these don't affect you. That's totally understandable. But for those that it does, it might be worth considering. And maybe let's just say these two things did not work. By the way, it did. It actually raised them upwards of 800 nanograms per deciliter by the end. And it'll probably continue improving as we continue the cycle. Now, he could have honestly went straight to the route of test, but again, taking testosterone injectable. But again, the idea is we want to get you from point A to point B with as little harm to your body as possible. So maybe it's taking something that's related to the peptide family and effectively increasing your testosterone without causing too many stresses on your organs, body, whatever it is, might be a little bit of a better idea. And then we go back to the nootropics. A lot of influencers don't seem to utilize a lot of these things, despite the fact that their entire workload is based around their brain function, how they're able to talk to people, how they're making decisions. These will all help effectively improve your quality of focus. And I don't just mean you looking at a screen, you looking at a project, whatever it is, whatever you're doing. You're not just making decisions on the fly with no thought. You want to be able to think clear to make sure that all the decisions that you make are actually accurate and what you want. Sometimes people can be misguided or rather fogged by their own brain because of this. Now let's talk about another topic. This is the second step of the lever program, which is energy management. Back to this. So as I mentioned before, there's a misconception here where I listed, I have to go to the gym 6 times a week. Guess what? You don't. What's actually true is that you only have to go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week. Now, the reason I mention this is because a lot of bodybuilders, even though you might not be one, a lot of bodybuilders actually train only about 3 to 5 times a week because it's a lot better than training 6, 7 times a week. Why? Because recoverability. And this points to the next topic, which is recovery in the 3-step lever program, lever system. So when you are training less, you are giving your body more time to be able to adapt to, or rather neurologically adapt to these new weights. So you're not only getting stronger with less time in the gym, but you're also building more muscle because you can recover better, because recovery is one of the main components in being able to effectively build muscle and also lean down, because you don't want to be going into the gym all tired, not performing well. You also don't want to be doing everyday tasks absolutely tired because you were hammered from the gym. You don't want to be doing that. I totally get it. So just remember, when someone tells you you need to be training a certain amount of weeks, you actually don't. You don't even need a lot of volume. When I say volume, I mean you don't need to be doing 20 different exercises. You don't need 20, 30, 40, 50 sets, right? You don't even need a high commercial gym or like a private gym. You can literally do this at the hand of the hotel's gym, or rather, you can do this at the hotel gym. So when you have the hotel gym, again, you still can do a lot of variety in your exercises, right? I even have an ebook out on this that's free, but you don't need much to be able to work out. At the end of the day, your goal is just to lose fat. Your goal isn't, hey, I want to be a bodybuilder. I want to do this. I want to do that. Your goal is just to get healthier, potentially even reach that status where you look like an influencer that everyone, those IG influencers, right? Whatever it is. What's funny is they also do this as well, despite preaching something like this. They're actually negatively impacting their own recovery by doing this. Now, the second part is strict meal plan. As I've already stated, this leads back to the diet and supplements with meal planning, where I said, hey, it doesn't matter. It's just about input control. You're making sure you eat less than you burn. Now, the third misconception that I want to actually get back into is following a specific routine. Now, let's take a look at all of this. Do any of these point to a specific routine? Physiologically, none of these make sense for you to need or require a specific routine. All you need to do is just manage all these things effectively well within your specific time frame, and you're good. Again, you can eat Chipotle, you can eat Chick-fil-A grilled nuggets, whatever it is, something that you have quick access to right now to be able to make sure that you can get in all that food, you're losing weight, but you're not wasting too much time. Sometimes people opt into a meal prep company, which allows them to just get all the food delivered to them to make sure that, hey, I'm hitting my protein, I'm also not eating too much, because the meal prep companies make it so that it's relatively low calorie but high protein. So you have all that out of the way. Now, we want to get back into deficiencies, which is part of the second step of the lever system. And this directly ties into blood work. You'll notice how I mentioned testosterone prior and how I mentioned panels prior. A lot of panels can include anything from the range of, your cholesterol, your estradiol, your vitamin B12, vitamin D3 levels, whatever it is, right? There's a lot of ways to test this. But if we address those deficiencies, including not just with supplements, but with food, you're going to perform a lot better. This also ties directly back into what I said before: gut health, brain health, and anything under the sun. These all tie in together. So you want to make sure that you're effectively getting in the right nutrition, meaning even though you can eat all these junk food and still get in the same amount of calories, which might be a little contradictory, if you want to perform better as a person, or rather have better brain function, you still want to make sure it's kind of in that healthy range, so you at least meet all those requirements. But if you don't meet it from the meal planning, simply just go back into the supplement section and just make sure you're getting in extra supplements that can meet all those factors. And one app that I recommend to use is Chronometer, to be able to track everything. Now, the third thing is outside of work and the gym. So the two main factors are sleep and relaxing. And I know a lot of you might think, hey, I can grind this out an extra hour. I can grind towards my career an extra hour. I can build this business for an extra hour. Trust me, it is not worth it. What's funny is, in many studies, the significance between 7 to 8 hours of sleep, yes, 7 to 8 hours, is extremely drastic. It decreased brain function by about 41%, or rather how you perform day to day. That's why I always stress sleep. Sure, you might not be able to get 8 hours of sleep. At least try to get 6 to 8. Just try to get it in that range. I promise you'll just feel better day to day. And this also ties back into relaxing, just because of the fact that, you still need to unwind mentally, so that at least you can feel better day to day. And I'm not saying you need work-life balance for this. I'm more so saying, hey, how can we take this system and apply it to your specific needs? If you're traveling a lot, simple. Go back to this section that I've explained. If you're maybe not having the time, you're on your desk all day, you can literally just order some form of meal prep company to be ordered to you. And then if it doesn't meet all the required deficiencies that you have, then simply add in supplements to meet those. And yeah, it just goes back into it. And then if you also want better sleep, this also ties back into supplements if you don't want to go in the route of taking an absurd amount of food just to get in those. For example, one big supplement that I recommend you guys take is magnesium glycinate. Try it. Try it at 400 mgs. So I just want you to try magnesium glycinate at 400 mgs just to see where you're at, how you feel the next morning. I can guarantee you it'll improve your sleep by tenfold. Just trust me on this.